Okay, so ready to start, Aline. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar, How It Scored Paper 2, Part 2 of 2. And before we get started, we'll just do a few little bits of housekeeping, just so that you know this session will be recorded, is being recorded, and it'll be shared afterwards. If you have any questions during the presentation regarding the content of the session, please put them in the Q&A and I'll aim to answer at least some of them at the end. And if you have any other questions, please get in touch, like for dates and such like, please get in touch with your local test centre. Okay, so official welcome. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining this Pearson training series. We've prepared it specially for the Pearson Test of English General Test Centre teachers all around the world. And it's lovely to have so many of you from so many parts of the globe. The webinars are part of a complete series, which is going to be covering topics. Well, we've already covered the topics about scoring. This is the last one of the scoring topics. And next week, there are sessions on preparing your students for different skills, also revision strategies. And then I think the following week, there'll be a couple on looking after how to take care of your students and yourself, because you're important too, you know, in these strange times we find ourselves in. So those will be, I think, I just heard on the 4th and 5th of May. My name is Aline Boundy, and I'm really delighted to be the presenter of your webinar today. I'm based in the UK, as some of you heard already, and I've worked for Pearson for many years. I'm currently one of the senior team of examiners for the Pearson Test of English General Speaking Test. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And what we're looking at today is part 2 of the speaking test. We're looking at some of the tasks, the qualitative aspects, there are 5 of them, the marking criteria. We'll look in detail at the marking criteria and how this is applied, you know, to the actual test and how we score them. So part 1 focused on sections 10 and 12. And in part 2, we're going to look at sections 11 and 13, as well as the rest of the qualitative traits. Okay, so a little reminder about how I grouped the tasks yesterday. I put the 4 tasks on the board and said, how would you group these into 2 if you had to? And the color coding is the way that we've grouped it. So in part 1, we looked at sections 10 and 12, which basically test speaking alone and at length. I mean, when I say alone, obviously it's with the interlocutor, but section 10, if you remember, sustained monologue. It's the test taker speaking by themselves for a specific length of time. And section 12 described the picture. Again, it's responding to a visual stimulus and being able to speak at length. So the other 2 tasks that we're going to look at today are section 11 and section 13. And these test aspects of discussion and interaction with another speaker. So we're going to look at all of that today. I'm just going to go quickly over the 1 to 5 marking scale. This was also discussed in part 1, but I thought it's good to have a reference to it on each presentation. So we use a marking scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 3 at level 5 because there's no score above, there's no level above 5, so we can't say it's almost at the next level. And the whole speaking test, as you're aware, is scored eventually out of 20, it's worth 25% of the overall mark. So how do we get to 25 from, you know, the raw marks that we award? So the marking scale of 1 to 5, someone who has been entered at the correct level and performs at level, so matches the marking criteria for all the traits, will get a 3 for each individual trait. The score of 3, right in the middle of 1 through 5, is at level, okay? A borderline test taker would receive a score of 2 per trait, and if the performance is almost at the next level, they'll get a score of 4. A score of 1 indicates the performance is below the level being tested. It's actually the level below. And a score of 5 indicates the performance is at the next level. So it's above the level being tested. And, and what this means is that when we examiners are marking these, we're constantly going back and forward between the level we're marking at, the level below, and the level above, depending on what we're hearing in each test taker's audio, because we want to be sure that we're giving the right mark. So the maximum scores possible for all the different levels, because as you know, there are 6 levels of the Pearson test of English General, and they correspond to the Common European Framework. So the A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2 correspond to A1 and L1. These are the 2 lower levels. At that level, we have only 3 tasks. So there are 3 sections, 10, 12, and 13, a total of 8 item traits because they've all got 5 qualitative traits. 5 points maximum per item, and that gives a score of 40. From levels 2 to 4, we have, and this would be, hang on, A1, this would be B1 up to C1. Yep, B1, B2, and C1. We have 4 tasks, which gives a total of 9 item traits at 5 marks each. So we get 5 score points per item, maximum total of 45. And for level 5, it's a little bit different because, as I said, we only score out of 3 at level 5. There are still the 4 sections, so we get 9 item traits, 3 score points, maximum possible. Maximum total possible is 27. And on the next slide, I have some examples of how this works with actual raw scores. The raw score, the general formula is the raw score is divided by the maximum possible total and then multiplied by 25. And I'm sure you're all perfectly aware of this and capable of doing it, but just to have it to refer to. So an at-level test taker at level 3, who has scored 3s across the board, will get a raw score of 27, which is divided by 45 and then multiplied by 25. And that gives a score of 15 marks out of 25. A just at level test taker at level 5, who has scored 2s across the board, 9 times 2 is 18, that's the raw score, divided by 27 and multiplied by 25, gives us 16.6, and that is rounded up to 17 out of 25. And the last example, a below level test taker at level 1, who has scored 1s across the board, so really should have been entered probably for level A1, gets a score of 8, a raw score of 8, that's divided by 40, multiplied by 25, and that gives us 5 out of 25. And that's the score you get on the statement of results, I believe. Okay, so that was just a quick overview of those, how we actually compute the marks together. So looking at tasks 11 and 13, again, if you remember, what I wanted to impress upon you yesterday was the difference between how you may think of it as a teacher and what we as examiners are listening for. And I'm sure you have a sense of that already, but just let's go over that in some detail. So what's being tested in each task? In section 11, the discussion, the interaction in this section should resemble a real exchange of views rather than a sequence of questions and answers. And so the prompts that the interlocutor is given for section 11, you have to sort of pick and choose between those because it depends what the test taker says and what they argue as to, what the best thing is to respond to that. And in section 30, we'll go into this in more detail when we look at each task in turn. Section 13, the role play. This consists of a two-way conversation in a given situation. The aim is to assess the test taker's ability to perform language functions that may be required in situations other than a speaking test. So, you know, you have to go into role and pretend that you are, I don't know, a shopkeeper or a friend who wants to organize something. It varies depending on the level and so on. So that's a quick overview of what they are being asked to do, really. And then the focus of the marking criteria. What are the examiners listening for in each task? So at section 11, we call it the discussion, and it is a discussion, but the focus of the marking criteria is turn taking, and we're going to look at that in some detail shortly. And section 13, the role play, the focus of the marking criteria is called sociolinguistic appropriateness. So we're going to also look at that in a moment. Okay, so back to section 11, the discussion. Focus of the marking criteria, turn taking. Now, turn taking is something that we all do. We learned how to do it from being babies. In fact, if you have any very small children or babies around you, you know that you don't even need to use actual language. You can speak, and the babies will respond in turn, and that's the beginning of their learning process of turn taking, because we all do it. But here's the Common European Framework definition, and this is a part of it, and I'm going to read the rest to you. Turn taking focuses on one interaction strategy that allows language users to obtain, hold, and end the discourse initiative. Okay, so this is about when you're in a conversation, being able to hold the floor or gain the floor, you know, be able to speak and keep speaking without, you know, being put off by someone else, or, you know, giving the floor to someone else also. And English and many languages actually shows a preference for the avoidance of pauses and overlapping speech between turns. So the test taker needs to show their knowledge of who speaks when. And we do this without really thinking about it, to be honest, but they need to be able to do this effectively, especially from level 3 upwards. So they need to be able to demonstrate that they know when to come in and when they can, you know, initiate a turn. And they can signal when they're prepared to give up the floor, usually by a pause or by intonation, or show that they're ready to contribute by starting to speak. So, I mean, these are all things that you'll be aware of, but it's good to have them all brought together. The expectations, of course, differ according to the level, but the test taker should be able to, at level 2, initiate, maintain, and close simple conversation on familiar topics. At level 3, initiate, maintain, and end discourse with effective turn taking, and they can use stock phrases to gain time and keep the turn. That's what I meant by keeping the floor when I said earlier. At level 4, they can select a suitable phrase to preface their remarks appropriately in order to get the floor. And level 5 can manipulate a discussion, can get or keep the floor even in hostile, emotional, or contentious situations, and can appropriately balance politeness and determination. So there's quite a lot to take in there, which is why it's so good that you're going to have the recording available. You'll be able to go back and, you know, read and listen and pause as you want to, because I don't think you can pause me at the moment, can you? So those are the marking criteria, and all of the marking or most of the marking criteria comes from the Common European Framework. There are a few other sources as well for certain things, but most of it is based on the Common European Framework of reference. just a couple of things to remember in the discussion. The discussion is a formal interaction. It's a bit of a simplistic division, but if you think of the discussion is more formal and the role play is less formal. Now, having said that, there are role plays where you need a formal register. It depends on the situation that's being described. But the role play is more likely, particularly at the lower levels, to be informal, you know, speaking with a friend or a family member. Whereas the discussion, which is only from levels 2 up, remember, should be approached as more of a formal interaction with people, you know, making their point and arguing for a particular stance. During this discussion, the test taker is expected to take a stand and defend their position. However, you should be aware of it becoming a second monologue. The interlocutor can interrupt here if the test taker is talking for too long. And this is something, because the discussion comes straight after the sustained monologue, sometimes we get, you know, a test taker who's quite competent and can keep going for a long time, which is great in the sustained monologue. But here we need to have the interaction, the back and forth between the interlocutor, or you as the teacher, you know, practicing being the interlocutor. I don't know how many of you actually also do work as interlocutors, but you know, we need the back and forth. We need to have it would be good to have, you know, say 3 back and forth interactions in the discussion, not just another long monologue and then maybe one question from the interlocutor and a very short response. It should be, you know, back and forth between them. And so that's why I say beware of becoming a second monologue. The interlocutor doesn't want to interrupt in the sustained monologue, but you know, here it's good to, especially if they're kind of on a bit of a roll, and you need to interject with something that will make them think and consider what they've said. Excuse me. And the test taker should also use a range of stock phrases to help structure their argument. A lot of the time, especially, and this is more for level 3 upwards, but when they are asked a question and they come back and just say, yeah, but, that is not going to make a very good impression on the examiner. That's, for a start, it's too informal. And really, they should be trying to use phrases like, however, on the other hand, to be honest, or I agree or I disagree with you, that's true. You know, I agree with you to a certain extent, however, I think that, you know, to structure their response in that way, in a kind of a formal way, so that there is that back and forth interaction acknowledged. And they should also invite the interlocutor to participate by asking them direct questions. They can ask, you know, do you agree with me? What do you think? You know, it is supposed to be a discussion. It's not just a question and answer, which, you know, is often what happens in class, isn't it? Particularly at lower levels. And I think that's why it's just from level 2 upwards, so that the candidates are able to do this. At levels 2 and 3, the discussion is on a concrete issue, and at levels 4 and 5, it's on an abstract issue. So we expect, you know, the students to be prepared to be able to discuss this kind of thing. And you know, in the webinars next week, I'm sure you'll get lots of tips about how to prepare your students for these different tasks. And then at all levels, we're looking for a conclusion of some sort, and that, you know, goes back to the criteria where it says is able to, how is it phrased again? Initiate, maintain, and conclude, I think. Okay, so on to an example of turn taking. This is a level 5, so here is the level 5 criteria. Can manipulate a discussion, can get or keep the floor, can appropriately balance politeness and determination. And, you know, remember, it's kind of a formal. So this is, we're going to listen to an example of section 11, level 5. And as we're listening to it, you know, think how you would score it out of 3 for the task and for each qualitative aspect, which is fluency, interaction, range, accuracy, and phonological control. Remember that a score of 3 is at level. Okay, so I'm just going to play that for you.
Okay, now we are going to discuss something together. The question is, does being very ambitious have a negative effect on your life? What do you think?
An ambitious person has strong desire for success. He tries to be happy and prosperous. I consider myself to be an ambitious person, but I can't say that it has a negative effect on my life. The more I work, the better, the higher income I get. So I can afford some kind of traveling, designer shoes and clothes. I enjoy these things. It's an advantage for me, absolutely positive one.
Yes, I somehow agree with that, but you can become obsessed and may start to neglect family and friends.
I see your point of view, but personally my friends and family, they trust and love me a lot. So if I don't keep in touch with them for a long time, it doesn't mean that I have forgotten about them. It means that I'm trying very hard, and sooner we'll meet in person. What is your opinion about it?
I agree up to a point, but for me, if your aims are not reached, you will experience an acute sense of disappointment.
Actually, even successful and rich people are not born successful. If I fail once, it doesn't mean to give up. It means that I have to look back, analyze my mistakes, and it's the step forward, but not backwards. I can feel a little bit depressed, but I will never show it. It means I have to work harder. Do you share my position?
I am not sure I agree with you, because trying to attain unrealistic goals can cause stress.
I see, but I think that even commuting to work every day by public transport or just an argument with a colleague can cause the same stress. I suppose I just need to have appropriate schedule, clear goals and aims, and I'll be on top of the hill.
Okay, so being very ambitious has a positive effect on your life, isn't it?
Yes, that's true.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. She sounds like a very organized person, doesn't she? So here are the marks that this candidate was given. For turn-taking, she achieved a 3. Good evidence of discourse markers. She used things like, I see your point of view. She prefaced, you know, one of the things she said with actually, and she involved the interlocutor in the discussion by inviting her in. It wasn't particularly smooth on one invitation, but she did, you know, involve the interlocutor. The other traits, remember that these are all for the whole of the test, not just the turn-taking section that we're listening to. So these are kind of an overview. They take into account all the other 3 tasks as well. But she did quite well, as you can see. For fluency, she achieved a 2, expresses herself fluently and spontaneously, but lacks a natural colloquial flow. I think you'll agree with me on that one. For interaction, a 3, she interacts with ease and skill, interweaving her contributions quite naturally. Range, it was very good, enabling her to convey her meaning precisely, and she achieved a 3 for that too. Accuracy, a high level of grammatical and lexical accuracy is maintained most of the time, so just a 2 there, not quite there. There were a couple of little minor errors. And phonological control, again a 2. Her speech is clear and is understood immediately. She varies sentence stress and intonation, you know, for emphasis, but she's not really using assimilations comparable to a native speaker, and she lacks that smooth colloquial flow as we noticed in fluency. So a mark of 2 for phonological control. Okay, so that is all for the turn taking, and we'll move on now to role play, section 13. So the focus of the marking criteria for the role play is sociolinguistic appropriateness. Isn't that a lovely phrase? And the definition of this from the Common European Framework refers to the socio-cultural conditions of language use and the ability to show sensitivity to social conventions, which are things like rules of politeness, the norms governing relations between the generations, sexes, classes, and social groups. You know, so how we address people, things like register and so on. How, I mean, I would address, you know, someone who is a student differently from someone who is my superior at work, for example, and you all would do the same. So all of these things are what sociolinguistic appropriateness refers to. And at level A1, it's quite basic, as you might expect, can establish basic social contact by using the simplest everyday polite forms of greeting and farewells, introductions and saying please, thank you and sorry, etc. You know, I think it's a bit of a joke, isn't it, worldwide, that British people are always apologizing even if they're not at fault, but we do, you don't need to go to the extreme, but you know, to be aware of how to say hello, goodbye and all that sort of thing. At level 2, can perform and respond to a wide range of language functions in a neutral register. And register, as you know, refers to the level of formality. By level 3, can express him or herself confidently, clearly and politely in a formal or informal register, appropriate to the situation and persons concerned. And by level 5, as well as having all of these, you know, previous criteria under the belt, a level 5 candidate will have a good command of idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms with an awareness of connotative levels of meaning. Okay, so not just the first meaning, but other things that can be implied by certain words. All right, so again, there you get the sense of the progression of expectations for the marking criteria for the role play. Okay. The role play is, as well as the sociolinguistic aspect, the role play is also marked on its transactional or functional content. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, transactional refers to things like, you know, buying something in a shop or ordering something, or functional is referring to things like advising someone on how to do or suggesting something, or perhaps I said advising already, didn't I? Advising, suggesting, informing someone about something. So the questions you could ask yourself, you know, as well as the sociolinguistic side of things, is, does the test taker complete the task appropriately? Do they convey all the details specified on their card? And we're going to have a look at a card shortly. Are they using an appropriate register? That's really from level 3 up. And also, please make sure that they end the role play using an appropriately polite phrase like, thank you very much, that's very kind of you. Thank you for your help. There's usually something that the role the interlocutor is playing can be thanked for. And you know, that's important to get that in, not just okay. I know that's a little bit overused these days, but you know, to be able to use the range of different phrases that are available is always a positive. So here is an example of a role play card. Now this is not the one we're going to listen to. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get hold of that one to put it on here. And I'm sorry there's so much text on here, but I just wanted to have it all on one slide. So this is a level 3 candidate and interlocutor card. It says section 13, 2 minutes, which is how long the role play lasts at level 3. This is what the interlocutor says. Now we're going to take part in a role play. Here is a card with a situation on it. Hand the card to the test taker. That's this one here. Allow up to 15 seconds to study the card. And the test taker's card says, the situation. You are in a shop. You bought an expensive computer from this shop, and when you opened the box, the screen was smashed. The examiner is the shop assistant. Your goal, you want to get your money back, not a replacement. Okay, so it's quite an open task at this level. The interlocutor's script, it almost repeats this. So once the candidate has had the 15 seconds to study the card and decide how they're going to approach this, the interlocutor will just, read through this. You are in a shop. You bought an expensive computer from this shop, and when you opened the box, the screen was smashed. I am the shop assistant. All right, you start. So waiting for the candidate to say something, and the responses given here are, oh, sorry, clicked that by mistake. The responses given here are suggestions for the interlocutor, but you can adapt them to fit what the candidate says, because you don't know exactly, certainly at level 3 upwards, you don't know exactly how they're going to approach this. So these are the probable interlocutor responses, let's say, but you can adapt them, and it's good practice to adapt them to be able to fit with what the interlocutor what the candidate actually says. So the hello, how can I help you? So you'd expect the candidate to say something like, yes, hi, I bought this computer last week, and when I opened the box at home, the screen was completely smashed. And then, you come in with the next question or something that is appropriate. I'm not going to go through them all. And at the end, if you are, do teach your students to say a thank you very much for their help or whatever it is at the end. And then the interlocutor will say thank you. That is the end of the test. So they're in role for this whole part, and then they're back in interlocutor role at the end. And we're actually going to listen to a level 3 test. The criteria is can express him or herself confidently, clearly and politely in a formal or informal register. So once again, I'd like you to listen to the audio and think of how you'd score this one out of 5 for the role play and for each of the 5 qualitative aspects. All right, so here we go with this one.
Now we are going to take part in a role play. Here is a card with a situation on it. Please read it to yourself.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm your friend. Together we're trying to make a plan to go to a rock music concert and have a meal out with a group of our friends. All right, I'll start. So what kind of concert should we go to?
I would like to go to a rock concert.
Okay, do you think that's a good idea? Do you think everyone in the group would like that kind of music?
Yes, because there is a very famous band, Led Zeppelin, and they play this night for charity.
Okay, what about having something to eat? Should we go for a meal? What do you think? Before the concert or after the concert?
No, before, because the concert will finish very, for example, at 1 a.m. and it isn't it isn't a good thing going to eat something at that hour.
Okay, so what kind of restaurant shall we book, do you think?
Why don't we go to eat a pizza?
A pizza?
Yes.
Okay. All right, do you think everybody's going to like a pizza?
Everyone's like pizza.
Okay. Okay, if you think that's okay, I'm happy with that.
Okay.
Can you let everyone know?
Yes, I will phone everybody, and we will go.
Okay. Okay, that will be good. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. That is the end of the test.
Okay, before we go to the marks for that, I just wanted to mention that at levels A1 and L1, so the two lower levels, the role play, the test taker has just a series of simple instructions for a sequence of conversational moves. And for those levels, usually the interlocutor can just stick pretty much to the script as far as possible and you know, guide the test taker. As we get up from levels 2 to 5, it's a bit like this one that we saw, where they have more leeway, if you like. They're given an objective to pursue and a degree of freedom as to how to achieve that. So this is why the interlocutor on the role play at the higher levels has to be, you know, listening to what the test taker says and fit their response accordingly. So back to the scores for this one. This was a level 3, if you remember. And so for the role play, she achieved a 2, so she was just at the level. She expresses herself quite confidently and clearly, but lacks the everyday polite forms like thank you. And she repeats okay several times, so she just gets up the level. And then the others, again, let me just remind you, these refer to the whole test, so it may not, if they don't completely make sense for what you heard, you know, it was just an extract. Fluency, she can keep going, but with many pauses and hesitations and repetitions. She wasn't quite at level for fluency. And actually, if we read the descriptor of the level below, she was matching the level 2 descriptor for fluency. Interaction, just at level. She helped the discussion along adequately, but did not initiate. For range, she scored at level for this. She has a sufficient range of language to express herself using some complex sentence forms and fairly accurate. A high level of grammatical and lexical control with, you know, just some rare mistakes. So she actually matched the criteria there for accuracy. And then phonological control, a 2, she's just at the level. Almost clear and natural pronunciation, but with a few errors, which I don't think we heard in this section. The dropped H in help, she was saying elp, and a mispronunciation of Africa, I think she said Africa, and slightly monotonous intonation. So we would like to have a little bit more variety of normal intonation there for phonological control. So that's the I think that's the end of the the end of the tasks. And so moving on to the rest of the qualitative aspects that we hadn't looked at yesterday. So interaction, range, and accuracy. And I'm going to look at those one by one. So for interaction, well, interaction, you know, links into turn-taking very obviously. The Common European Framework definition focuses on the oral exchange in which production and reception alternate and may overlap. So at level A1, can interact in a simple way, but communication is dependent on repetition and rephrasing by the interlocutor. So very basic level there. Level 2 can initiate, maintain, and close simple conversation on familiar topics. This is probably sounding quite familiar because it's very similar. It's almost identical to the turn-taking criteria. Level 3 can initiate discourse, take his or her turn when appropriate, so that's showing a knowledge of when, you know, to come into a conversation, and end conversation, though they may not always do this elegantly. So they may be talking over people, you know, whereas someone who is a bit more skilled would be able to time their interactions better. So by level 5, can interact with ease and skill, picking up and using non-verbal and intonational clues apparently effortlessly. Can interweave his or her contribution into the joint discourse with fully natural turn-taking, referencing, allusion making, etc. So those are all of the, as you can see, the progression of expectation for interaction. And moving on to range, what do we mean by range? Well, range focuses on the scope of lexical and grammatical competence of a language user. You know, and you'll hear us talking about, you know, a good range of grammatical structures, a good range of vocabulary, that sort of thing. A1 has a very basic repertoire of words and simple phrases related to personal details and particular concrete situations. At level 2, has enough language to get by with sufficient vocabulary to express him or herself with some hesitation. You know, we don't want too many hesitations at level 2, but we do accept some. By level 3, we're hoping the pauses have more or less gone and that this person has sufficient range of language to be able to give clear descriptions without much conspicuous searching for words, using some complex sentence forms to do so. And level 5 shows great flexibility, reformulating ideas in differing linguistic forms to convey finer shades of meaning precisely, has a good command of idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms. And on those, you know, it's good to hear them and to hear them being used, but we don't just want them thrown in willy-nilly, you know, anywhere just for the sake of it. We need to have these idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms used appropriately so that, you know, we have a sense that the test taker knows when to use them. And moving on to accuracy, which is our last qualitative trait. Accuracy, you all know what accuracy is, but knowledge of and ability to use the grammatical resources of a language accurately. That's the Common European Framework definition. And of course, we accept different levels of it at the different levels of the test. So at level A1, shows only limited control of a few simple grammatical and lexical structures and sentence patterns in a memorized repertoire. So if they're achieving this, then they'll get a 3. Level L2 uses reasonably accurately a repertoire of frequently used routines and patterns associated with more predictable situations. By level 3, shows a relatively high degree of grammatical and lexical control, does not make errors which cause misunderstanding, and can correct most of his or her mistakes. You know, that's a good thing. If they make a mistake and they then correct it, that shows us that they're aware that they've made a mistake. I mean, we all do that, don't we? It's quite a normal thing to do. It's not bad. And level 5 maintains consistent grammatical and lexical control of complex language, even while attention is otherwise engaged, for example, in forward planning or in monitoring others' reactions. So we're expecting quite a bit more by level 5 in terms of accuracy, as you can see. Okay, so that concludes part 2. I'll just give you a quick summary of what we've done today. So we have 4 tasks altogether and 5 qualitative aspects, which give us 9 scores at levels 2 to 5. Of course, 8 scores for the 2 lower levels. The marking scale is 1 to 5 and 3 is at level. except for at level 5, the marking scale is only 1 to 3, as there's nothing above it. And for what we've done today, section 11, discussion, the marking criteria focuses on turn-taking. It's a formal discussion, you know, get them to take a position and defend it, and use stock phrases to structure their interaction. Invite the interlocutor into the discussion. Oh, and I meant to mention the one that we listened to, I don't know if you noticed, but the interlocutor was also demonstrating very good practice. She was using stock phrases to preface her remarks back to the test taker. I don't remember word for word, but she said something like, I agree with you up to a point, or something like that. So, and it's very good, that's very good practice, you know, in your classroom as well. It may seem a little bit over formal, but you know, it's a formal discussion, so it's very appropriate to bring those things in. Another thing that we do suggest to the interlocutors, if the candidate doesn't take one position or the other, like for or against, if they say, well, it depends, then they are, the interlocutor is encouraged to, you know, push them on that. But what do you really think? Or to take a very strong position themselves, so they're forced to argue against it. And then for section 13, the role play, remember the transactional or functional content, as well as the sociolinguistic appropriateness, you know, all of the conventions of politeness, the please, thank you, I'm sorry, that kind of thing. Formal and informal register. Oh yes, be polite, say please and thank you. And I think that is everything for now. Here are some links. These will be on the handout that you'll be sent anyhow, because you're registered for the webinar series. So, you know, don't scribble, don't worry about getting them down now, but there are links to resources and a blog post on the Pearson website. And I've gone over again, haven't I? But if we have maybe I can answer a couple of questions, and we'll try to get the other ones answered by email later on. So, Kyle, if there are any questions, I can take them now, if you like.
Sure, Aline. Thank you very much. Yeah, there are a couple of questions about British accent. And yeah, how, I mean, if you could clarify in that in some cases this type of acts, the majority may, especially adults, will never possess this accent, and for instance the examiner didn't have this accent either. So yeah, if you could please explain this further.
Yeah, yes, I appreciate that, and you're right, you know, the interlocutors don't always have a completely British accent. It's kind of something we would like to hear, but you know, we appreciate that it's not something that's easy to acquire, especially if the person taking the test hasn't spent an extended period of time in an English-speaking country. So, you know, while it's something that we would like to hear, it isn't going to be penalized, but we would, you know, as we get further up the levels, we would expect to hear less of a strong foreign accent, what I would call a foreign accent, you know, the original accent, mother tongue influence, let's say. So it's good to try and, you know, work on that if you can. But we do appreciate that it's something that comes with time and with experience, and you know, multiple exposure to the language in a whole bunch of different situations. Does that clear that up?
Indeed, yes, thank you. There is another one related, that in earlier exams in section 13, when handing the card to the test taker, you ask them to read it yourself. Do we need to do this anymore?
To read it yourself. Yes, the one I showed you, let me just think. The one I showed you is actually quite old. So it's from what's available on the website. So the wording may have changed more recently. And I think you're right. I think it does say, please read it to yourself. Yes, because that's sometimes not understood clearly. They don't understand that they have to read it, in their head. You could say just please read it silently, if that would be clearer. We're not going to pull you up or mark you down for that, because that's what the intention is. It's for the test taker to have 15 seconds to have a look at what they're going to be asked to do and to sort of decide how they're going to approach the role play. So I think you're right. It does say, please read it to yourself recently. So you can either say that, or if you say, please read it in silence, because often there's a bit of a back and forth. The test taker starts to read it out, and the interlocutor says to yourself, and so we lose a bit of time there. So, if you want to just say in silence, perhaps that would be clearer. That would be fine, I think.
Okay, there is a question about section 11 that it would be best if candidate gives the conclusion in this section, but if the time is coming to a close, if the examiner can conclude the section or not.
Yes, obviously it's better if the candidate does, because they're the one being marked. I mean, for the whole of the test, we as examiners, we want to hear the test taker, not the interlocutor. We want to hear more of the test taker. But I appreciate what you're saying here. And actually, in the example that we listened to, that in that discussion, the interlocutor did go back to the original question, didn't she? And she said, and she changed the question. She said, so what was it? What was the question again? Did you? Oh, I can't remember now. But she changed it around to fit with the stance that the test taker had actually taken, and the test taker agreed. So yeah, that was a perfectly adequate example of how to conclude it. But if the test taker can do it, that would always be better. But it's not bad. If the time's running out, you've got so many things to think of. I think you have to trust your own judgment and do what you think is best at that time, what sounds most natural. Okay, hope that's helpful.
Sure, I'm going to finish with mixing some questions that are arising here in terms of what could the interlocutors do, for instance, when the prompts do not correspond to the test taker respondents. What can they do about it? But also there is another one related in the terms of what if the candidate mentions the answer at the beginning and then fulfilling the rest of the time is difficult. So what could we do in these circumstances, or what could they do?
Yeah, well, thank you. Very good questions. And the first one in particular, he would be talking about the higher levels, I'm guessing, and the interlocutor is able to adapt, what they say back to the test taker to make it fit. And in fact, that's preferable, because if the interlocutor just sticks to what's printed, those are suggestions, and they sometimes, if they wouldn't fit exactly, which I think is what this person who's asking the question is pointing out, there's kind of a disconnect between what the test taker says and then the next printed piece of information. Yes, you can adapt it a little bit to fit, what the test taker has said, as long as it's on the same subject and that it's asking, more or less the same kinds of things. I think that's perfectly, in fact, that's preferable to just sticking rigidly to what's printed there because it's printed in front of you. It gives the test taker a better experience as well, and allows them to respond more naturally. And the second part was, what happens if the test taker answers the question at the very beginning?
Yeah, right at the very beginning, and how to fulfill the rest of the time.
Well, again, that's a judgment call for you to make. You need to use the follow-up questions in that case to, you know, extend what they've said, or I mean, you could, if it's hard it's hard to generalize without an actual specific example, but you do have some flexibility there, is what I'm saying. And if they've already answered the question, try to draw them out, or could you expand on that, or could you give me some more details? That kind of thing would be appropriate. Or if they're really stuck, then try to ask a question that would be at least related. You know, don't go off on a different subject if you can help it. That would be a little bit inappropriate, but try to keep it within the same topic area. I hope that is helpful. You know, I'm sure the thing is, interlocutors, you know, you have the language to be able to do this, and you know, we trust you to be able to do your best for the test takers as well, you know, within the parameters that you have with the what's in front of you on the exam paper. Hope that's helpful.
It is. There are some other questions about, about different things in terms of the written part, or still about the accents, but yeah, I mean,
we can have a look at those and get back by email maybe.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah, wrap up probably as we're a bit ahead of time, but thanks everyone for submitting your questions through the bottom. Thank you very much. Okay, yeah, thank you for joining to this session. And yeah, I'll leave it to you, Aline, to do any closure you want to make. Yeah,
well, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your attention. I didn't, obviously, I can't see any of you, which is a bit of a shame on this, but I think we'd have a whole screen full of people if you were all visible. So thank you for your time. I know everyone is busy trying to adapt their teaching at the moment, and it's lovely to have so many people from all different parts of the world here. I hope it was helpful, and we will try to cover all your questions, you know, in the next week or so, and get everything back to you so you have some clarity about what you're supposed to be doing. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely weekend, everyone, and looking forward to seeing you during the next week's sessions.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stop the recording.